Rosalie Voss slapped every dollar she owned onto that counter, and the whole room went quiet. 11 months. Every skipped meal, every candle burned to nothing. Every night her fingers cramped from mending other women's hems. It had come down to this moment. This counter, this envelope, and the bolt of deep navy cotton she had spotted through the window before she'd even pushed open the door. She wasn't asking for charity. She wasn't asking for pity. She was asking to buy a dress. Lenora Ashcombe looked at the money. Then she looked at Rosalie, all 150 kilograms of her. Standing straight in a faded brown dress that had been let out at the seams, so many times the original stitching was barely a memory, and Lenora smiled the way a woman smiles when she has already decided the answer is simply selecting the cruelest way to deliver it. Madame Lenora said, loud enough for every woman in the shop to hear. "We make dresses here," she paused. "We do not manufacture tents." The laughter hit Rosalie like a slap across the face. Before we go any further, if this kind of story belongs in your life, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to know how far this story travels. Now let's go back to Copper Hollow, Colorado, the summer of 1878, and a woman this town was about to severely underestimate. Rosalie had seen that navy cotton from the street. Deep blue with tiny cream flowers scattered across it. Honest and beautiful, in a way that made her chest ache a little. Not the fanciest fabric in the window, there was silk on the shelf and a bolt of emerald brocade that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. But the navy spoke to her. It felt like a woman who worked hard and knew her own mind and didn't ask permission to feel pretty on a Saturday evening. The community supper was 3 weeks out. Reverend Hargrove had announced it 2 Sundays running. Families from ranches all across the Juniper Creek Valley were coming into Copper Hollow for the first time since winter. And Rosalie had made a quiet, private decision. She was going to attend wearing something she had chosen because she liked it. Not something she had let out twice at the seams and convinced herself was still wearable. Not something functional and forgettable and designed to disappear. Something made for her body, her actual body. The one she had lived in every single day of her 29 years. She stepped to the counter. Lenora Ashcombe was arranging ribbon spools with the deliberate care of a woman who treated every object in her shop as a personal statement. Sharp-featured, elegant, draped in burgundy that fit her like a declaration. She looked up. 4 seconds. Rosalie had learned to count those seconds the hard way, that particular quality of assessment that travels from open to closed. From willing to look at her to looking through her instead. In the time it takes to breathe in and breathe out twice. "Good morning," Rosalie said, keeping her voice level. "I'm interested in the navy cotton in your window. I'd like to know if your shop takes custom orders." "Custom orders," Lenora repeated. "A dress made to my measurements." Lenora's gaze traveled down from Rosalie's face, slow, deliberate, making sure Rosalie understood. The journey was being taken on purpose. It moved over the faded brown dress, over the seams that had been let out and re-sewn and let out again, all the way down to her boots and then back up. The entire room shifted into a particular anticipatory stillness. Madame Lenora said, pitching her voice to Carrie. "We make dresses here. We do not manufacture tents." The woman in yellow silk near the button display laughed, first sharp and bright. Then the ripple moved through the room, softer, the comfortable sound of people who have witnessed a cruelty and are choosing to call it wit. A woman in pale green leaned toward her companion. Using that much fabric on a single gown would be a terrible waste. One could make 3 proper dresses from what she'd require. More laughter. Rosalie's face went hot, not with shame. With something far older and more practiced than shame, a rage that had spent so many years being swallowed it had developed its own particular burn. Familiar as a scar pressed directly, she felt every woman in that room measuring her. She felt the verdict come in before a single word of her defense had been heard. She looked at her money on the counter. She looked at Lenora. I asked. She said quietly and clearly, "Whether you could sew it." I did not ask whether you approved of the woman wearing it. Lenora's chin lifted. Women of your dimensions are better served by practical workwear. Functional cuts. A shop of this caliber serves a specific clientele. And I'm afraid. You're afraid, Rosalie said of a paying customer. The room went very still. Lenora's expression didn't change so much as calcify. I'm afraid we cannot accommodate a commission of that nature. I suggest the general goods store on Pike Street, Mr. Halloran stocks practical, I understand, Rosalie said. She picked up her envelope. She straightened the shoulders of her faded brown dress small. Precise without theater. Just a woman resettling herself back into her own skin, and she walked to the door and pushed it open and stepped out into the summer heat and stood on the boardwalk with the envelope held against her chest, and she breathed. Just breathed, standing near the back of Ashcombe fine dresses. Beside a display of dress coat buttons his foreman had asked him to price, Callum Rourke had heard every single word. He was 35 years old and one of the wealthiest cattle ranchers in the Colorado Territory, and he wore it the way he wore most things practically. Without announcement. Dark trousers, light work shirt. A brown vest that had seen better seasons, a hat that had seen worse. He did not look like a man who owned 40,000 acres. He looked like a man who had been up before sunrise and intended to be useful before noon. He had stood still through the whole thing. He'd watched Lenora deliver her performance. He'd watched the room laugh. He'd watched Rosalie Voss hold herself absolutely together under a roomful of women who had decided her worth before she'd opened her mouth. And he'd watched her pick up her money, straighten those shoulders, and walk out without begging a single person to reconsider. Then he walked to the counter. Lenora turned to him with the automatic warmth of a shopkeeper recognizing a valuable customer. The unpleasantness of the previous exchange apparently already filed away under necessary corrections. "Mr. Rourke," she said brightly. "What a pleasure. What can I help you find today?" "The navy cotton in the window," Callum said. "I'll take the whole bolt." Lenora blinked. "The whole bolt. What's the price?" "Well, certainly only I had promised, Mrs. Hargreaves' first selection from that bolt," she specifically, "then perhaps," Callum said, setting his payment on the counter with the same quiet deliberateness Rosalie had used. "You should have sold it when someone came through your door, willing to pay honestly for it." He said it without heat. The way a man states a fact he has no interest in arguing about. Lenora looked at the money. She looked at his face. She picked up the money. Callum had the bolt wrapped and was heading for the door when he noticed a folded paper on the floor, near the counter, slipped from Rosalie's envelope when she'd set it down. He picked it up. The heading was visible, before he thought about whether he ought to be reading it. Danner Mercantile and Lending. He had seen that name twice in the last month. On a debt notice at the Pruitt Ranch, a balloon payment that appeared without explanation on a 15-year-old account. And on a letter being read by old Calhoun at the feed store, a man who had owned his creekside property for 2 decades and was suddenly being told he owed twice what he thought. Both properties touched Juniper Creek. Callum stood in the doorway with a bolt of navy cotton under one arm and a folded statement in his hand, and he looked at the main street of Copper Hollow. Rosalie Voss was walking away, brown dress straight back. Head up. He folded the statement carefully and put it in his vest pocket. Then he went to find his horse. Rosalie didn't go home. She turned down a side road, found the bench someone had nailed to a fence post by the watering trough, and sat down in her faded brown dress with her envelope in her lap and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for exactly as long as she could afford to. Which was not very long. She was not crying. She told herself that and meant it. She was not going to cry over Lenora Ashcombe's opinion of her dimensions. She had survived 29 years of other people's verdicts about the space she occupied, and she was not about to start letting them accumulate now. But something hurt anyway. The way things hurt when you have known they were unfair your entire life, and knowing still doesn't make them cost any less. She opened the envelope and counted the money. $22.40. Earned stitch by stitch, ledger entry by ledger entry. One carefully recorded livestock record at a time. She had a gift with numbers her Aunt Della had seen it early. Put it to work, and left her the ranch because she trusted her with it. Rosalie had managed those 30 acres and that creek border and that modest cattle rotation with the competence of a woman who had been quietly running things long before anyone gave her official authority to. She didn't need much. She needed her land. She needed her work. She needed the particular satisfaction of a balanced ledger at the end of a hard month. Today she had needed a dress. She looked at the envelope. She looked at the empty road. She stood up and started walking back toward the general goods store. Thinking about pattern books, thinking about what she could cut from the fabric she already had at home. Thinking about whether the navy cotton had already been promised to someone who would actually be allowed to wear it, Miss Voss. She turned. Callum Rourke stood 10 feet back on the packed dirt road. A brown paper parcel under one arm and his hat in his other hand. Without the hat, he looked slightly younger and considerably less certain, which she noted as significant, given that he carried himself like a man who was rarely uncertain about anything. She looked at the parcel. She looked at him. "I believe you dropped something in the shop." He held out the folded statement. Found it on the floor near the counter. She recognized it immediately. Her stomach pulled tight. She crossed to him and took it without touching his hand. "Thank you," she said, and turned to leave. "The bolt is yours if you want it." She stopped. She turned back slowly. "I bought it from Ashcombe," he said. "I thought." He paused. "I don't rightly know exactly what I thought. But it seemed wrong for her to keep it, Mr. Rourke." She kept her voice careful. "I appreciate the sentiment, but I am not a cause." "No, ma'am, you're not. I'm a woman who was refused a commercial transaction because of the way I look. That is a common cruelty, and it does not require remedying by a man buying my fabric for me." "That's fair," he said. She waited for the but. "I'm not offering it as charity," he said. "I'd like to propose something, and I'm going to ask you to hear me out before you decide what you think of it." She didn't say yes. She didn't walk away either. "I run the Rourke spread," he said. 40,000 acres north of Juniper Creek. 62 ranch hands. Give or take, every one of them harder on work shirts than any reasonable man should be. My foreman's been after me 2 years to find a seamstress who can keep up repairs. Reinforcement, saddlery leather, work gear. I've tried 3 women in 18 months. None of them could handle the volume." Rosalie said nothing. "I've been told," he said, "by 3 separate people in this valley, that Rosalie Voss is the finest seamstress between Copper Hollow and the state line, and that she keeps accounts better than most bank clerks." "People talk," she said. "People talk," he agreed. "In this case, I believe them." He held the parcel slightly forward. "Legitimate wages for legitimate work. The fabric would count toward your first materials allowance. Whatever remains after the contracted work is yours to keep." Rosalie looked at the parcel. At the navy cotton inside it. She looked at him. "You went back in there," she said. "And bought the bolt that woman refused to sell me." "Yes, ma'am." "Because you felt sorry for me." "No, ma'am, no hesitation. Because she was wrong, and I had the money to make a point about it." "That's a different thing entirely." Something shifted in Rosalie's chest. Not softened, she didn't soften quickly, had learned not to. But registered. A precise acknowledgement of something that wasn't pity and wasn't performance. "Your proposed rate," she said. He named it. She looked at him for a moment. "That's low." He blinked. "That's what I pay skilled. For the volume you're describing. With my skill set, and the travel time from my property to yours. That number is low." She said it the way she said most things, directly. Without apology, with the particular authority of a woman who knows what her labor is worth. $12 a month, plus materials. And I choose my own suppliers when possible. He looked at her. Then he smiled, the involuntary kind, the kind a man's face makes before he's decided whether to let it show when something has genuinely surprised him in a good way. $12, he said. You choose the suppliers. I prefer the terms in writing, Rosalie said. I believe in documentation, so do I, he said. He held out the parcel. Then this belongs to you. Miss Voss, on account. She took it, heavier than she expected through the paper. Real and substantial in her arms, exactly what she had wanted. I'll need a week before I can start, she said. I have my own accounts to settle first. It wasn't until she said it that something sharpened at the back of her mind. Her own accounts. She thought about the financial statement in her pocket. She thought about the payment she had made to Danner Mercantile and Lending last month, carefully recorded. As she recorded everything, the month before that. She thought about checking her balance last week and noticing a number that seemed higher than it should have been. Telling herself she must have made an error somewhere. Telling herself she would go back through it and find the mistake. She had not gone back through. She had been busy. Good morning, Mr. Rourke, she said. Good morning, Miss Voss. She walked back toward the main street. Parcel under her arm, and the financial statement in her pocket. And something cold and quiet beginning to take shape at the edges of her attention. That evening, Rosalie spread every financial document she owned across her kitchen table and worked by candlelight with the systematic patience of a woman who trusted numbers more than she trusted most people. She worked for 4 hours. She checked everything twice. Then 3 times. Then once more because she needed to be certain before she allowed herself to feel what she was feeling. At the end of 4 hours, she sat back with her hands flat on the table and her jaw tight and her mind moving at a cold, precise speed that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with fury. The math was wrong. Not her math. Her math was correct, documented, cross-referenced, verified against every receipt she could lay hands on. Her payments had been made on schedule. Every one. Her ledger was clean. Danner's math was wrong. Payments recorded as partial when she had receipts proving full settlement. An inspection fee from the previous autumn no inspector had ever come. A boundary assessment charge from 6 months ago she had never agreed to. A duplicate late penalty applied in the same month as a verified payment. Her current balance, according to Danner's most recent statement, was $47 higher than it had any right to be. $47 on a modest cattle operation. $47 was not negligible. $47 was the difference between a manageable quarterly payment and selling part of her herd to cover it. She pulled her original loan documents close and read the collateral section. She read it again. She set the papers down carefully. The way you set something down when you don't trust your hands to stay steady about it. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the cattle. It was the water rights. Juniper Creek, the creek that ran along the eastern edge of her property. Clear and reliable through even the driest summers. The creek she had taken for granted for 2 years, because it was simply there. Simply hers, simply part of what Aunt Della had left her. She looked out the dark window toward where she knew the creek ran. Invisible in the night. Then she blew out the candle and sat in the dark. She sat there a long time. She thought about the way Callum Rourke's face had gone still when he read the heading on her statement. Just for a moment before he folded it. The stillness of a man who recognizes something and chooses not to say so until he understands more. She thought about Pruitt, about Calhoun, Creekside Properties. Both of them struggling with accounts they couldn't quite explain. She thought about what a man like Horace Danner might know that she didn't. What might make a strip of water-bearing land along a dry Colorado creek suddenly worth engineering the ruin of every small rancher who owned access to it. She picked up her pen. She opened to a fresh page. She began listing every discrepancy she had found. Dated and documented, cross-referenced against every receipt in her possession. She wrote for 2 more hours. When she was done, she had 4 pages of evidence and the beginning of a very clear picture of what was being done to her and who else it was likely being done to. She did not feel afraid. She felt the specific clarifying anger of a woman who has been underestimated by the wrong person. She closed the ledger. She looked at the navy cotton sitting folded on the far end of the table, real and beautiful in the darkness. Exactly what she had wanted, finally hers. She was going to make herself that dress. But first she was going to make absolutely certain she still had a home to wear it in. When Callum Rourke arrived at her ranch the following morning, she met him at the gate before he had fully dismounted. Ledger under her arm, expression set, and he read her face in the first 2 seconds and swung down from his horse without saying a word and looped the reins over her gatepost and waited. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I want a straight answer, all right? That statement you found. When you looked at it just before you folded it, what did you recognize?" He was quiet for a moment. "2 ranchers," he said. "Pruitt and Calhoun. Both of them showing payments that disappeared from their Danner accounts. Pruitt's had a balloon charge appear last fall, 15 years of clean payments, and suddenly he's $300 behind on a debt that shouldn't have grown. Calhoun's deed boundary shifted on paper last winter." He paused. "Both of them have creek property." Rosalie opened her ledger. "Mine is worse," she said. 8 months of manipulated entries. Payments dropped, charges invented, penalties doubled. She turned it to face him. "The collateral on my original loan is not the house. It is not the cattle." She put her finger on the relevant line. "It's the water rights to Juniper Creek." He looked at the page. He looked at her. "He wants the creek," she said. "That's what this is. He's been engineering defaults on every property with creek access in this valley. I want to know why, and I want to know how many others he's done it to." Callum was quiet for a long moment. "There's a railroad survey," he said. "Not public yet. A proposed spur into Copper Hollow. The engineers filed preliminary route assessments 3 months ago. And the line would need a guaranteed water source for the construction camps and the station." Rosalie stared at him. "Juniper Creek," she said. "It's the most logical option in the region. And if one man holds the water rights to most of the creek-adjacent properties before the survey becomes public, he can set his own price," Callum said. "To the railroad. To anyone who wants access. He buys distressed land cheap by forcing the defaults himself. Then sells the water rights at whatever figure he chooses once the line is confirmed." The morning was still cool and the light was coming gold across the dry grass of her pasture. And a meadowlark was singing somewhere off toward the fence line. And Rosalie Voss stood at her own gate and understood. With complete clarity, the full shape of what had been done to her and what was being done to every struggling rancher in this valley. "How many properties?" she said. "Do you think he's running this on simultaneously?" "I don't know," Callum said. "But I think we need to find out. Then we start with Pruitt," she said. "He trusts you. Take me to him. I want to see his documents." Callum looked at her, this woman with her ledger and her 4 pages of documented evidence, and her jaw set and her eyes carrying a particular steady fire that he recognized as the most dangerous kind of anger there is. Not the explosive kind, the kind that becomes something. "Some of them may not want to talk," he said, pride being what it is. "Some of them," Rosalie said, "are going to lose everything they own inside 60 days if someone doesn't put all of this in front of a judge. I expect they'll find the words." She walked back up her porch steps. "Are you coming?" she said, "or not?" Callum untied his horse. "Yes, ma'am," he said. The investigation that would eventually bring down Horace Danner exposed the largest fraud in Copper Hollow's short history. Redirect the water rights negotiations for an entire railroad spur project. And permanently alter every calculation Danner had made about who in this valley was too small to matter began on the dirt path outside Rosalie Voss's gate on a June morning in 1878. It began because a woman had slapped her honest money down on a counter and been told she didn't belong. It began because she had sat alone at a kitchen table with a candle and a ledger and refused to believe the numbers were her mistake. It began because she was smarter than the man who had decided she was invisible. And the bolt of navy cotton with the tiny cream flowers sat on her kitchen table. Patient as justice, waiting for her to come home. Pruitt's ranch sat 8 miles north of Rosalie's property. And the ride there was mostly silent, not the uncomfortable kind of silence. The kind that happens between two people who are both thinking hard about the same problem and have enough respect for each other not to fill the space with words that don't earn their place. Rosalie rode beside Callum on the bay mare she kept for longer distances, her ledger wrapped in oilcloth and tied to the saddle. And she spent the 8 miles going over numbers in her head, the way other people went over prayers. Methodical, repetitive, looking for the thing she might have missed. She hadn't missed anything. That was what kept her jaw tight the whole ride out. Thomas Pruitt met them at his fence line before they reached the gate. He was a lean man in his late 50s with a sun-damaged face and the cautious eyes of someone who had learned that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. He nodded at Callum. He looked at Rosalie with polite uncertainty. "Tom," Callum said. "She runs the old Della Voss property, down on the South Creek line, Miss Voss," Pruitt said. "Mr. Pruitt." She swung down from her horse without waiting for an invitation. "I need to see your Danner account records. Every statement you have. Going back as far as you kept them." Pruitt looked at Callum. "She's the one who caught it," Callum said. "Not me." That landed. Pruitt studied Rosalie for a moment with a different quality of attention, less uncertain, more careful. Then he said, "Come inside," and turned toward the house. His kitchen table looked like Rosalie's, had looked the night before the accumulated paper of a man trying to make sense of numbers that refused to cooperate. He had his statements out already, had probably had them out for weeks, going through them the same way she had, getting the same wrong answer every time. Rosalie sat down, unwrapped her ledger, and got to work. She didn't ask permission. She didn't explain her methodology. She simply started reading his documents with the focused speed of someone who knows exactly what she's looking for because she has already found it in her own. Pruitt stood at the edge of the kitchen, watching her. "She always liked this," he said quietly to Callum. "I only met her yesterday," Callum said. "But I'm starting to think yes, 4 minutes in." Rosalie looked up. "This payment, November 14th. You have a receipt?" Pruitt rummaged through the pile and produced a carbon receipt slip, creased from handling. She compared it to his statement. She turned the statement to face him and put her finger on the entry. "He recorded this as a partial payment," she said. "You paid in full. The difference was rolled into your next quarter's principal, with a compounding penalty attached." She was already moving to the next page. "He's been doing it since at least March of last year. Every time you made a full payment, he recorded it short by somewhere between 8 and 15%, charged you a partial payment penalty on the manufactured shortfall, and compounded it forward. By my calculation," she ran the figures in her head, cross-referenced against the page, ran them again. "He has extracted an additional $212 from your account through manufactured debt. And your current balance is not what he's been telling you it is." Pruitt sat down slowly in the chair across from her. $212, he said. "At minimum," Rosalie said. "I haven't finished the full review." Pruitt put both hands flat on the table. He looked at them for a moment the way a man looks at something when he needs to collect himself before he says anything he'll regret. "I thought I was losing my mind," he said. "I've been through those numbers 50 times. My wife thought I was miscounting. I thought I was miscounting." He looked up. "I kept every receipt. My wife called me obsessive about it. Every single receipt going back 11 years. That," Rosalie said, "is going to be very useful." She kept reading. Callum poured coffee from the pot on the stove and set a cup beside her elbow without being asked. She didn't acknowledge it, but she picked it up without looking away from the documents. Pruitt watched her work for a while. Then he said, "How'd you find it, on your own account?" "I'm a bookkeeper," Rosalie said. "I've kept accounts since I was 14. When something doesn't balance, I don't assume it's my error until I've ruled out every other possibility first." She turned another page. "Most people assume the bank is right, and they made a mistake. Danner counted on that. How many others?" Pruitt said. "I don't know yet," Rosalie said. "That's what today is for." She finished Pruitt's review in 40 minutes. By the end, she had found discrepancies totaling $268, 8 months of manufactured shortfalls, compounded penalties on debts that had never actually existed, and one boundary assessment charge that appeared on no official county record she could locate. She wrote it all down, dated, documented, cross-referenced. Then she closed her ledger and looked at Pruitt directly. "I need you to trust me with copies of all of this," she said. "And I need to know, are you willing to stand up in front of a territorial judge and swear to what these documents show?" Pruitt looked at Callum. "She's not asking me," Callum said. "She's asking you." Pruitt looked back at Rosalie. "You think we can actually prove it?" "I think," Rosalie said, "that Horace Danner kept such careful records of his own fraud because he never expected anyone to read them from the right direction." She picked up her pen. "I intend to read them from the right direction." Pruitt reached across the table and pushed the entire pile of documents toward her. "Take what you need," he said. Calhoun was harder. He met them at his door with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who has been embarrassed enough in times about his financial situation that he has started treating it like a personal failure rather than someone else's crime. "I'm not interested in discussing my private accounts with strangers," he said, looking at Rosalie with a particular wariness, some men reserved for women who appeared without warning and seemed to know things. "Mr. Calhoun," Callum said, "Horace Danner has been manipulating your debt records." Miss Voss found the same pattern in her accounts and Pruitt's. "If he's running the same scheme on yours, I manage my own affairs," Calhoun said flatly. "Yes, sir," Rosalie said. "So did I. And I paid him $63 more than I owed him over 8 months because I managed my own affairs and trusted his arithmetic instead of my own." She looked at him steadily. "How long have you been worried about your balance?" A long silence. "Since last September," Calhoun said. "Have you been through your receipts against his statements line by line?" 5 times. "Did the numbers match?" His jaw tightened. "No." "Then you already know," Rosalie said quietly. "You just haven't had anyone confirm it for you yet." Another silence. Longer this time. Calhoun stepped back from the door. They spent 90 minutes at Calhoun's table. The discrepancies in his account were different in structure, from Pruitt's less focused on payment manipulation, more concentrated on a boundary assessment fee that had been applied 4 times under 4 different administrative labels, and a water access charge that appeared in no original loan document Calhoun could produce. But the water access charge was the thing that made Rosalie's pen stop moving. She read it twice. She read the original loan terms. She read the charge entry again. "Mr. Calhoun," she said carefully. "This charge, riparian access administrative fee, when did this first appear on your statement?" Calhoun leaned over. "January this year. And your original loan agreement." "May I see the collateral section?" He produced it. She read it. The collateral listed was the property itself, house, outbuildings, the acreage. But there was a handwritten addendum at the bottom of the page, initialed but not fully signed, referencing water rights as secondary collateral in the event of sustained default. The handwriting was not Calhoun's. "Did you write this?" Rosalie said, turning the page to face him and pointing. Calhoun looked at it. His face changed. "No, I never. That wasn't in the document when I signed it. I read every line. That was not there." Callum, standing behind Rosalie, leaned forward to look. "That's document alteration," he said. "That's felony fraud," Rosalie said. She didn't raise her voice. She said it the same way she had said everything else directly. Without heat, with the precision of a woman whose anger had long since graduated from feeling into thinking. He's not just manipulating payments. He's altering the underlying contracts. She looked up at Callum. Which means he's done this before. Which means he knew exactly how to do it without being caught. Unless someone looked, Callum said. Unless someone looked, she agreed. She wrote everything down. By the time they left Calhoun's property, the light had shifted to late afternoon, and Rosalie had filled 7 pages of her ledger with dates, figures, cross-references, and notes on document inconsistencies. She had also added a new column to her tracking one she had labeled simply Alter Ed, with the word underlined twice. They rode for a while without speaking. Then Callum said, "There are 4 other properties I know of that sit on creek access and have Danner accounts. 2 of them are women ranching alone. One is an older man who lost his wife last winter and has barely been keeping up. The 4th is the Garza family. They've been in that valley for 20 years. Rosalie looked at him. "You've been watching this." "I've been watching something," he said. "I didn't know what it was until this morning." "And the railroad," she said. "When does the survey become public?" Callum was quiet for a moment. 60 days, he said. "Once it's public, the land values along the creek corridor will change overnight. Anyone who doesn't already own their water rights by the time that survey is announced will have no leverage at all," Rosalie said. "No leverage at all," he agreed. She looked at the road ahead of them. "Then we have 60 days, she said. Less if Danner realizes someone is looking." She thought about that for a moment. "He's going to realize soon," she said. "He sent a statement to my property 2 weeks ago with the manipulated balance. If I don't respond the way he expects, if I don't start panicking about a payment I can't make, he'll know something is wrong." "What do you want to do about it?" Callum said. "I want to visit every property on your list before the week is out," Rosalie said. "I want every discrepancy documented. I want copies of every altered contract I can find." She paused. "And then I want to find someone with legal authority to look at all of it, before Danner has any idea what's coming." "I know a territorial land officer," Callum said. "Man named Aldridge. He's based in Denver, but he comes through Copper Hollow on circuit every few weeks. He's honest. I trust him enough." "Set up a meeting," Rosalie said. "As soon as he can come." They visited 2 more properties before dark. The first was a widow named Vera Colson, who had been ranching alone for 3 years since her husband passed. A small woman with weathered hands and a ledger she kept in a tin box under her bed because, she told Rosalie without embarrassment, she trusted tin boxes more than she trusted men. Her Danner account showed the same manufactured payment shortfalls as Pruitt's. But there was something additional, a letter in the tin box, dated 4 months ago, from Danner's office, suggesting that given her difficulty meeting her obligations, she might consider a voluntary transfer of her water access rights in exchange for a reduction of her current balance. Vera had not responded to the letter. She told them, "Been afraid. He made it sound like I was doing badly," she said. "Like it was my fault. Like I should be grateful he was offering a way out." She looked at Rosalie across the kitchen table. "I almost signed it. I had the pen in my hand." "But you didn't," Rosalie said. "My husband always said, never sign anything when you're frightened," Vera said. "I put the pen down and I put the letter in the box and I tried to forget about it." She paused. "I couldn't forget about it." "You don't have to forget about it," Rosalie said. "I need you to remember every detail of it. Can you do that?" Vera straightened in her chair. "I can do that." "Good," Rosalie said. "Because that letter is evidence." Second property was the Garza Ranch, 20 years of family history on 120 acres that ran along the best stretch of Juniper Creek in the whole valley. Miguel Garza was 40 and had the careful, watchful quality of a man who had learned that in Colorado territory, a family with a Spanish name needed to be twice as correct and twice as documented as anyone else, just to be taken half as seriously. He had already known something was wrong. He had already consulted with a lawyer in Pueblo, who had charged him $40 and told him the contracts looked complicated and he might consider settling. When Rosalie showed him what she had found in the other accounts, Miguel Garza sat back in his chair and was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "How do I know you're not working for him?" It was a fair question. "You don't," Rosalie said, "not yet. But I can show you my own account records alongside yours. And you can see the identical pattern yourself. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust your own math." She laid her ledger open beside his documents. He leaned forward. He looked for a long time. "The same structure," he said finally. Quietly. "Exactly the same," Rosalie said. "Same intervals. Same percentage manipulation. Same compounding method." She paused. He built a system. He ran it the same way on every account because it was efficient, and because he was certain no one would ever compare notes. "Why wouldn't we compare notes?" Miguel said. "Because people who are struggling financially are ashamed of it," Rosalie said. "Because they think it's their fault. Because they don't talk to their neighbors about their debt. Because Danner counted on every one of us sitting alone with our receipts and deciding we must have made an error somewhere." Miguel looked at her for a long moment. "My grandfather built this ranch," he said. "I know," Rosalie said. "And it is going to stay in your family." It was a promise she had no legal authority to make. She made it anyway, because she intended to keep it. They were back at Rosalie's ranch by full dark. Callum tied his horse and followed her up the porch steps without being asked, which she registered but didn't comment on. She spread everything on the kitchen table, her own documents. Copies from Pruitt, notes from Calhoun, Vera's letter, her observations from the Garza ranch, and stood back and looked at the whole picture at once. 4 properties. 6 if you counted her own and included the preliminary information from a 5th rancher Callum had mentioned who hadn't been home today. A clear timeline. A clear structure. And 1 letter, written in Danner's own hand, suggesting a voluntary transfer of water rights. "He got sloppy on Vera," Rosalie said. "He thought she was isolated enough that it wouldn't matter," Callum said. "He thought a widow ranching alone would be too frightened and too grateful to think clearly," Rosalie said. "Same as he thought about all of us." She picked up the letter and read it again. The language was careful. It was not an explicit admission. But the offer itself, a reduction of balance in exchange for voluntary water rights transfer, implied that Danner knew those water rights had a specific and significant value he was not disclosing. A value connected to something he knew was coming, that the ranchers did not. That was the thread. That was the piece that connected all of it together. "The letter proves he knew about the railroad," Rosalie said. Callum looked at her. "How do you figure that?" "Because why else would he offer a balance reduction in exchange specifically for water rights? Not the land, not the cattle, the water rights." She set the letter down. "He only does that if the water rights are worth more than the debt he's supposedly forgiving. And they're only worth that much if he knows a railroad is coming through this valley and will need that water." She looked at Callum. He had inside information. Someone told him about the survey. A long silence. "That's a serious accusation," Callum said. "Everything about this is serious," Rosalie said. "I stopped being careful about serious things approximately 24 hours ago." Callum leaned against the edge of the table with his arms crossed, looking at the spread of documents. He had a look on his face. She was beginning to recognize the particular stillness of a man who is working through implications and not particularly happy with where they're leading. "There are 7 investors in the railroad spur," he said. "Myself included. If one of them gave Danner advance information about the route, then the fraud goes further than one lending operation in Copper Hollow," Rosalie said. "Yes," he said. "Do you know which of the 7 it could be?" "I have a suspicion," he said. "I'm not prepared to say it out loud until I have something more than a suspicion." She looked at him. "Fair enough. But I want to know when you're ready to say it." "You'll know," he said. She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why she believed him. She had known this man for exactly 36 hours. She had agreed to a business arrangement with him and ridden 8 miles to 3 ranches and watched him pour her coffee without being asked and stay 3 steps behind her in every conversation they'd had since morning. Never once moving in front of her, never once taking over. Never once suggesting that his money or his standing or his 40,000 acres gave him a better claim to be in charge of any of this than she had. She was not accustomed to that. She added it to her list of things she was noticing about Callum Rourke without making any particular decision about what to do with the information. "Aldridge," she said, "the land officer. How soon can you reach him?" "I'll send a telegram first thing tomorrow," Callum said. "If he's in Denver and not on circuit, he could be here within the week." "Tell him it's urgent," Rosalie said. "Tell him you have documented evidence of systematic debt fraud targeting multiple creek-adjacent properties in the valley, and that you believe the scheme is connected to advance information about a proposed railroad route." She paused. "Don't use my name in the telegram." Callum looked at her. "Why not?" "Because Danner has friends in this town," she said. "Telegrapher included, possibly. I'd rather Aldridge arrive before anyone warns Danner that someone is collecting evidence." Callum nodded slowly. "You think like a strategist." "I think like someone who cannot afford to lose," Rosalie said. She started organizing the documents into categories: altered contracts, separate from payment records. Vera's letter separate from both, her own account comparison set aside as the baseline. She worked quickly and without narrating what she was doing. The way she always worked, and after a while she became aware that the kitchen was very quiet and that Callum had not left. She looked up. He was watching her work with an expression she couldn't immediately classify: not pity. Not admiration exactly. Something more direct than either of those. The look of a man who is paying attention, because what he's watching is genuinely worth watching. "You should go," she said. "I know," he said. But he didn't move immediately. "Miss Voss, what you did today. At those ranches. The way you talked to Vera Colson. The way you talked to Garza." He paused. "You didn't just show up and tell them what was happening. You made them feel like they had something to offer. Like they weren't just victims." Rosalie looked at him for a moment. "They're not victims," she said. "They're witnesses." "There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. "There's a difference," he agreed. He pushed off from the table and picked up his hat from the chair where he'd left it. "I'll send the telegram tomorrow," he said, "and I'd like to come back tomorrow evening, if that's agreeable, to go over the Garza documents more carefully. There was something in the boundary recording on his Eastern Acre line that I want to look at against the county survey maps." "Come at 6, Rosalie said. "Bring the survey maps." "Yes, ma'am." He went to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. "For what it's worth," he said, without turning around, "that navy cotton is going to make a very fine dress." Rosalie looked up from her documents. He was already gone. She sat alone in her kitchen for a moment, listening to the sound of his horse moving away down the road. And then she looked at the bolt of fabric sitting on the far end of the table. Blue and quiet and patient, and she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a very long time: the specific warmth of being seen by someone who was paying attention for the right reasons. She folded it carefully and set it on the shelf. Then she went back to her documents. There was still work to do. 3 days later, Rosalie received a notice from Danner Mercantile and Lending. It was delivered by a boy from town who handed it to her at the gate with the blank-faced efficiency of someone who has been told not to wait for a response. And she took it and read it, standing right there in the morning heat, and did not let her face change at all while she was reading it. It was a payment acceleration notice. Under a clause buried in paragraph 7 of her original loan agreement, a clause she had read and understood and accepted, because at the time she had no reason to believe she would ever trigger it. Danner was asserting that a pattern of irregular payment had activated a provision, allowing him to demand full settlement of the remaining balance within 30 days rather than the agreed quarterly schedule. The remaining balance, per Danner's accounting, was $214. The remaining balance, per Rosalie's accounting, was $101. And she had made every single payment on time. There was no pattern of irregular payment. He had manufactured one by manipulating his own records. She folded the notice and put it in her pocket and walked back to the house and sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the wall for exactly 2 minutes. She allowed herself 2 minutes. Then she opened her ledger and began calculating the precise dollar amount by which Danner's claimed balance exceeded her actual balance. Documented to the cent, with every supporting receipt cross-referenced. When she was done, she read it back through once. Then she wrote Callum a note and sent it with her neighbor's youngest boy, who ran errands for a penny. The note said 4 words. He moved faster than I expected. Callum arrived within the hour. He read the notice. He set it down, he picked it up, and read it again. 30 days, he said. 29 now, Rosalie said. Aldridge arrives in 4 days, Callum said. I had confirmation this morning. 4 days is 4 days, Rosalie said. We need to find out who else has received an acceleration notice. If Danner is moving on me, he may be moving on the others too. She was already on her feet. I need to get to Vera Colson today, and the Garza Ranch. I'll ride to Pruitt, Callum said. Tell him not to respond to any communication from Danner's office until Aldridge arrives, Rosalie said. Tell him not to make any payment, not to sign anything, and not to let any representative of Danner's onto his property without a witness present. She was pulling her riding coat off the hook by the door. Same message to Calhoun, and if they've already received notices, then we know the timeline, Rosalie said. And we move faster. She stopped with her hand on the door. Callum, she said. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. For taking me to Pruitt. For the telegram to Aldridge. She paused. For staying 3 steps behind me in every room we've been in. He was quiet for a moment. You noticed that. I notice everything, she said. She opened the door. 4 days, she said. 4 days, he said. She walked out into the Colorado morning and swung up onto her horse and started the ride to Vera Colson's property. And the 29-day clock that Danner had started was already running. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing. Because he had built his entire scheme on the assumption that certain people would stay quiet, stay afraid, and stay separate, was that the woman he had tried to bankrupt in her own kitchen was already 2 steps ahead of him. She had been 2 steps ahead of him since the night she sat alone with a candle and a ledger and refused to believe the numbers were her mistake. And she was not finished. She was not finished by a long way. Vera Colson had received her notice 2 days before Rosalie got hers. She hadn't told anyone. She had folded it and put it in the tin box under her bed beside the letter offering to buy her water rights. And she had gone about her work the way she always did, feeding her chickens. Checking her fence line, making her coffee too strong, because that was how her husband had always made it, and she saw no reason to change now, and she had not slept more than 2 hours a night since. Rosalie found her in the yard when she rode up, and she knew the moment Vera turned around. There is a particular way a person holds their body when they have been carrying something alone for too long. A tightness across the shoulders. A stillness that isn't calm. You got one too, Vera said. It wasn't a question. 3 days ago, Rosalie said, swinging down. How much is he claiming you owe? $187. Vera's voice was flat. Controlled. I have receipts for every payment I've made in 4 years. Every single one. I know you do, Rosalie said. And we're going to use every one of them. She tied her horse to the post. The land officer arrives in 4 days, Vera. His name is Aldridge. He's out of Denver, and he's coming specifically because of what we've found in these accounts. I need you to pull everything you have out of that tin box. Vera stood very still for a moment. If I do that, she said, and it doesn't work, it's going to work, Rosalie said. You can't know that. No, Rosalie said, but I know what I can prove. And I know the difference between a man who made careful errors and a man who built a careful system. Danner built a system, and systems leave evidence. Vera looked at her for a long moment. Then she went inside to get the tin box. The Garza Ranch had also received a notice. Miguel's had come the same day as Rosalie's, and he had responded exactly as she'd feared, not with panic, but with pride. He had already written a response to Danner's office, asserting his payments were current and demanding a corrected accounting. The letter was sitting on his table, sealed, ready to send. Rosalie arrived 20 minutes before his son was going to ride it to town. "Don't send it," she said. Miguel looked at her. "I'm not going to let him think I'm ignoring it." "I know," Rosalie said. "But the moment you respond, he knows you're fighting back. Right now he thinks you're afraid. Let him keep thinking that for 4 more days." She sat down at his table. "If you send that letter, he'll have time to prepare. He has lawyers. He has connections in this county. We need Aldridge looking at the evidence before Danner knows anyone is looking at anything." A long silence. 4 days, Miguel said. 4 days, Rosalie said. "And then you can say everything you have to say in front of a federal land officer instead of a lending clerk." Miguel took the letter off the table and put it in his vest pocket. 4 days, he said again. He said it like a man accepting a sentence he intends to survive. Callum reached Pruitt and Calhoun the same afternoon. Pruitt had not yet received a notice, which meant either Danner was moving on a staggered schedule, or he'd decided Pruitt's account was less urgent than the Creekline properties. Calhoun had received his notice 5 days ago and had already been to see a lawyer in the next county who had charged him $30 and told him contractual disputes of this nature typically settled in favor of the lending party. When Callum told him about Aldridge, Calhoun sat down at his kitchen table and pressed his hands against his face. 5 days, he said. "I've been sick for 5 days thinking I was going to lose this place." "You're not going to lose it," Callum said. "You sound like you believe that," Calhoun said. "I believe the woman who figured all of this out," Callum said. "And so far she's been right about everything." That evening, Callum came to Rosalie's ranch at 6 o'clock with the county survey maps as promised. She had coffee ready and her notes from the day organized into a single coherent document, every property. Every notice date, every discrepancy amount, cross-referenced in a format she intended to hand directly to Aldridge the moment he arrived. Callum spread the survey maps across her table, and they stood side by side looking at the creek corridor. It was immediately clear, laid out on paper, what Danner had understood and they had not. The creek didn't just run through the valley. It ran through the valley in a specific pattern, a deep, reliable channel that widened at 3 particular points, creating natural collection pools that would provide year-round water access even in dry seasons. And every single property Danner had been targeting sat on or adjacent to one of those 3 pools. He hadn't been collecting creek access in general. He had been collecting the 3 best water collection points on the entire creek system. He hired someone who knew water, Rosalie said. Or the railroad's own engineers told him, Callum said. She looked at him. Which brings us back to the investor who gave him advance information. Callum was quiet. "You know who it is," Rosalie said. "I have a very strong suspicion," he said. "Tell me." He straightened up from the map, looked at her directly. "A man named Barnett. He's a Denver businessman. He was brought into the investment group by another partner. And he has a social connection to Danner, going back at least 10 years. I can't prove the connection to the fraud. Not yet. But Aldridge can investigate it," Rosalie said. "If Aldridge decides the evidence warrants a broader inquiry," Callum said. "Yes." Rosalie looked back at the map at the 3 water pools. At the properties circled around them, like targets on a range. "He was so certain," she said quietly. "He's so certain that none of us would talk to each other. That we'd each sit in our own houses with our own shame and our own confusion, and let him take everything piece by piece. Most schemes like this rely on exactly that," Callum said. "They rely on people believing their isolation is their fault," Rosalie said. "That's the real fraud, not just the numbers. The way he made every one of those people feel like they were the one who had failed. Like they were bad at managing their own affairs. Like they deserved what was happening to them." She stopped. Vera Colson had a pen in her hand. She was ready to sign away her water rights, because she thought she had no other choice. Callum said nothing. He understood when something was being said that didn't need a response. "Not again," Rosalie said. "Not to any of them. Not while I have working hands and a ledger." She straightened the survey maps and went back to her notes. They worked until 10 o'clock. Aldridge arrived on a Thursday morning, 2 days earlier than expected. He was a compact, unhurried man of 52, with the efficient movements of someone who has spent 20 years resolving disputes between people who all believe they are completely right. He wore a good coat and plain trousers, and carried a leather satchel that looked like it had seen of more courtrooms than most lawyers Rosalie had ever met. He came to her ranch first, because Callum had told him to start there. She had everything ready. He sat at her kitchen table, and she stood at the end of it and presented the full case in exactly the order she had organized it, her own account first, as the baseline and proof of concept, then Pruitt, then Calhoun, then Vera's notice, and the letter offering to purchase water rights. Then the Garza documents, including the altered contract addendum. Then the survey map overlay showing the 3 water collection pools and their relationship to every targeted property. It took her 40 minutes. Aldridge did not interrupt once. When she finished, he sat back and looked at the spread of documents on her table, with the expression of a man who is recalculating several things simultaneously. "How did you find the alteration on the Garza contract?" he said. "The handwriting in the addendum doesn't match Garza's signature style," Rosalie said. "And the ink is a slightly different color from the rest of the document, which suggests it was added after the original was signed, probably a different pen. Possibly a different date. You notice the ink color." "I notice details," Rosalie said. "It's what I do." Aldridge looked at the Garza document again. He looked at the survey map. He looked at Vera's letter. "This letter," he said, picking it up, "offering balance reduction in exchange for voluntary water rights transfer." "He wrote this in January, correct?" Rosalie said. "The railroad survey preliminary assessment was filed in November," Aldridge said quietly, "of last year, which means he had access to the survey information at least 2 months before he wrote that letter," Rosalie said. "And the survey information is not public." Aldridge set the letter down very carefully. "Miss Voss," he said, "how long did it take you to compile all of this?" 4 days, she said. He looked at her for a moment. 4 days, he repeated. Something in his voice had shifted, not surprise exactly. More like the recognition of something he hadn't expected to find in a small ranch kitchen in Copper Hollow. "Colorado. I had help with the writing," Rosalie said. "The documentation I did myself." Aldridge picked up his pen. "I'm going to need to speak with each of the property owners individually. I'm going to need all of these documents, or certified copies, held somewhere secure. And I'm going to need to look at Danner's public-facing business records before he has any indication that I'm here. I can have the property owners assembled by tomorrow morning," Rosalie said. "The documents can stay here. I have a locked cabinet." She paused. "And if you want to look at Danner's records without him knowing, I'd suggest you introduce yourself in town as a cattle land assessor. He has no reason to fear a cattle assessor." Aldridge looked at her. Then he almost smiled. "You've thought about this." "I've had 4 days," Rosalie said. What she did not tell Aldridge, what she had told no one yet except Callum, and only in fragments, was that she had also, over those 4 days, done something else, something quieter, something that had required more nerve than any of the ranch visits or document reviews. She had made the dress. She had worked on it in the evenings after the ledger work was done. By lamplight at the kitchen table, the navy cotton yielding to her hands the way good fabric does when someone who understands it is doing the cutting. She had no formal pattern. She knew her body precisely, every measurement, every proportion, and she had drafted the pattern herself on newspaper spread across the floor, adjusting it until it was right, not approximately right. Exactly right. The dress fit her, not despite her body, not around her body. It fit her actual body, the one she lived in. The one that was large and real and hers. It's the way something fits when it is made with knowledge and care, rather than compromise and apology. She had put it on one evening when the work was done and stood in front of her small mirror for a long moment. She looked like herself. She looked like the best version of herself. She put it away carefully and went back to the ledger. Aldridge spent 3 days moving through Copper Hollow as a cattle assessor. Quiet and observant and completely unremarkable. Callum accompanied him to Danner's public business registry at the county office, posing as a rancher checking on grazing easement filings. Aldridge spent 40 minutes with those records and came out with 3 pages of notes and an expression he had kept completely neutral until they were a full block away from the county office. Then he said he has a second set of filings. Callum looked at him. What kind of filings? Property interest filings, Aldridge said. Recorded under a business entity name, Colorado Creek Holdings, that doesn't appear anywhere in his public-facing lending operation. He's been quietly filing conditional interest claims on every creek-adjacent property where he holds debt. Aldridge kept walking, kept his voice low and level. If any one of those owners defaults on their loan, Colorado Creek Holdings automatically inherits a priority water rights claim. It's structured so that the transition of water rights is nearly invisible in the default process. Most county clerks would process it as a routine debt settlement. It's not routine, Callum said. It is not routine, Aldridge said. It is the most carefully constructed water rights acquisition scheme I have seen in 20 years of territorial land work. He paused. And Miss Voss found it from a kitchen table with a candle and a ledger in 4 days. Callum said nothing. He was thinking about Rosalie sitting at that table, about the particular quality of her stillness when she was working something out, about the fact that in every room they had walked into together over the past week, the most important person in it had consistently turned out to be the woman everyone in Copper Hollow had dismissed on sight. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday. Rosalie had requested it. She had asked Aldridge to allow her to present the initial documentation to Danner in person, in his own office, before Aldridge made his official intervention. Aldridge had been cautious about this. Callum had been more than cautious. He won't just sit there and listen, Callum said. He'll deflect, he'll threaten. He has lawyers and you'll be alone in his office with. I won't be alone, Rosalie said. You'll be there. Aldridge will be outside, and I'll have everything in writing. She looked at Callum directly. I need to do this. I need him to hear it from me. Not from a federal officer. From me, she paused. He decided I wasn't worth worrying about. I want to be the one who shows him how wrong that was. Callum looked at her for a long moment. Stand beside me if you want, she said. But I'm going to speak. He recognized that. He had heard it before, in a slightly different form. And he had understood it then too. I'll be there, he said. She wore the navy dress. She had not announced this decision to anyone. She had simply put it on that morning, the deep blue with the tiny cream flowers. Fitted precisely to her body, the body that Lenora Ashcombe had compared to a tent, and Horace Danner had apparently decided was too insignificant to pose any threat to his carefully laid plans. Callum was waiting on her porch when she came out. He looked at her and something crossed his face that he didn't quite manage to keep neutral, not pity. Not surprise, something quieter and more considered than either of those. Ready, he said. Yes, she said. They walked into Copper Hollow together. People noticed. She had expected that. What she had not quite expected was the particular quality of the attention, something different from the assessing, dismissive attention she had lived with for 29 years. People looked at her, and then looked again, and the second look was the kind a person gives when they are recalibrating something. She kept her head up. She kept walking. Danner's office was above the mercantile, up a narrow staircase that opened into a well-furnished room that was designed to communicate wealth and stability and the kind of permanence that makes a person feel their own concerns are small by comparison. Danner was at his desk when they came in, and his face arranged itself into the practice of a man accustomed to managing people through controlled environments. He was 48, prosperous-looking, with silver at his temples, and a coat that cost more than most people in the valley earned in a month. He looked at Rosalie, took in the navy dress, the ledger under her arm, the fact that she had walked through his door like someone who had every right to be there, and his expression shifted just slightly. Not enough for most people to read. Rosalie read it. He had not expected her to come to him. He had expected her to be home. Panicking, trying to find $214. "Miss Voss," he said smoothly. "What a pleasant surprise. And Mr. Rourke, I wasn't expecting you either. Please. Sit down." "I'll stand," Rosalie said. "This won't take long." She opened her ledger to the first marked page and laid it on his desk. "I've received your acceleration notice," she said. "I'd like to address the basis for it." Danner leaned back slightly in his chair. Comfortable, prepared. He had done this before. "Miss Voss, I understand these matters can feel overwhelming, but the terms of your original agreement clearly specify. My original agreement specifies acceleration in the event of a pattern of irregular payment," Rosalie said. "I have made every payment on schedule. Everyone. I have receipts." She turned to the relevant page. "Here is my payment on March 14th. Here is your record of that payment, which shows it as partial short by $11.40. Here is my bank receipt showing the full amount transferred." She turned another page. "Here is April's payment. Here is your record showing it as partial. Here is my receipt showing full payment. Here is May." She kept turning pages. "June, July, August. Every single month, Mr. Danner. Your records show partial payments I can prove with dated receipts were made in full." She closed the ledger. "My pattern of irregular payment," she said, "is a fiction created by your own bookkeeping." Danner looked at the ledger. His expression had not changed. He was very good at not letting his expression change. "Bookkeeping errors occur," he said pleasantly. "I'd be happy to have my clerk review the relevant entries, and if there's been a discrepancy—" "I've already found the discrepancy," Rosalie said. "Across 6 properties, all of them creek adjacent. All of them currently facing acceleration notices or voluntary transfer offers. All of them showing the identical pattern of manufactured payment shortfalls, compounded penalties, and in at least one case, alternate addendum that was not part of the original signed document." The room went very quiet. For the first time, something in Danner's face shifted in a way he couldn't fully control. Not fear, not yet, but the particular stillness of a man who has heard something he did not expect and is rapidly recalculating. "That's a significant accusation," he said. His voice was still level, but it had lost the easy warmth. "Yes, it is," Rosalie said. "I have documentation for every element of it." She reached into the ledger and produced a clean summary, 3 pages. Actually organized by property and cross-referenced to the source documents. She laid it on his desk. "This is a summary of the evidence I've compiled. The full documentation is with a territorial land officer who arrived in Copper Hollow 4 days ago." Danner looked at the summary pages. He looked at them for a long time. "A territorial land officer," he said. "James Aldridge," Rosalie said. "Out of Denver. He's been reviewing your public business filings for the past 3 days. Including, I believe, the filings under Colorado Creek Holdings." And there it was. The mask came down. Not completely. Danner was too practiced for complete collapse, but enough. The pleasant managerial expression cracked at the edges into something harder and colder, and considerably less confident. "You've been building this for a while," he said. "A week," Rosalie said. "It took me 1 week," he said. He looked at Callum. There was something in that look, an accusation, a recalculation. The rapid reassessment of which part of his plan had failed where. "She didn't need it," Callum said. "She found the first discrepancy before she'd spoken to me twice." Danner looked back at Rosalie. She stood in her navy dress in the middle of his expensive office with her ledger under her arm, and her receipts cross-referenced, and a federal land officer 3 floors below on the main street. And she looked at him with the calm of a woman who has been underestimated so many times that she has stopped being surprised by the moment of reckoning when it comes. "What do you want?" Danner said. It came out harder than he intended. The tone of a man accustomed to negotiating from strength who has just realized he is not in that position. "I want corrected accounts," Rosalie said, "for every property you've manipulated. I want the altered documents acknowledged and voided. I want the acceleration notices withdrawn." She paused. "That is what I want from you. What Mr. Aldridge wants may be a different conversation. You think you can walk in here with a ledger and address and I walked in here with evidence," Rosalie said. "The dress is my own business." A long silence, then, from somewhere outside in the corridor, they heard the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Steady, unhurried, Aldridge appeared in the doorway with 2 county deputies behind him and his leather satchel in his hand, and the particular expression of a man who has done this before and finds no satisfaction in it. "Only necessity, Mr. Danner," Aldridge said. "I'm going to need to review your internal account records. All of them, including those maintained under Colorado Creek Holdings." He stepped into the room. "I have the authority to compel that review, and I intend to exercise it." Danner looked from Aldridge to Rosalie. Rosalie looked back at him steadily. "You dropped something," she said. And she laid the summary pages flat on his desk, in every account you touched. Every single receipt, every payment record, every corrected entry. She picked up her ledger. "I don't make mistakes with numbers, Mr. Danner, and I don't let other people's mistakes stand uncorrected." She walked to the door. "Miss Voss," Danner said. She stopped but didn't turn. "How?" he said, and there was something raw in it now. Something stripped of the practiced management. "Did you find it?" "In 1 week." "How did you?" "Because I sat at my own kitchen table," Rosalie said. "And I refused to believe the numbers were my mistake." She walked out. Callum was at her side on the stairs, 2 steps to the right and 1 behind. The same position he had held in every room they'd been in since this began. He didn't say anything until they reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped out onto the main street of Copper Hollow into the full summer light. Then he said quietly, "You were extraordinary in there." "I was accurate," Rosalie said. "In there, those are the same thing." She stood on the boardwalk in the navy dress she had made herself, in the body that no dressmaker in Copper Hollow had thought worth fitting. And she looked down the main street past Ashcombe Fine Dresses with its window display, past the Mercantile below Danner's office, past the people who had watched her walk through this town for years and seen only what they had decided to see. A woman came out of the general goods store and stopped when she saw Rosalie. It was one of the women from Ashcombe's shop, not the one in yellow silk. One of the quieter ones, and she looked at Rosalie in the navy dress, and something moved across her face that was not cruelty, and was not pity, but was something closer to recognition. She didn't say anything. Rosalie didn't need her to. Callum stood beside her on the boardwalk and looked at the street and didn't offer any observation about what had just happened, which she appreciated. He understood when a moment needed to be held rather than narrated. After a while he said, "Aldridge is going to need you to give formal this afternoon." "I know," she said. After that, she said, "I'm going home. I have livestock to check and a fence post that's been needing attention for 2 weeks." She started walking. "And I want to take this dress off before I get it dirty." He walked beside her. "It's a very fine dress," he said. "I know," she said. "I made it." Upstairs in his office, Horace Danner sat across from James Aldridge and the deputies and looked at the summary pages Rosalie had left on his desk, and understood that the woman he had never once worried about had just dismantled the most careful plan he had ever built. In 1 week, from a kitchen table, with a candle and a ledger and 11 months of someone else's ill certainty that she didn't matter. Aldridge's formal review took 11 days. 11 days during which Rosalie gave her statement. helped 3 other property owners give theirs, organized every document into the format Aldridge's office required, and went home every evening to check her livestock and repair that fence post and cook her dinner and sit at the kitchen table long after dark, waiting for news that moved more slowly than she would have liked. She was not a patient woman by nature. She was a precise woman, which was different. Precision required waiting when waiting was the correct action. It did not make the waiting comfortable. Callum came by most evenings. Not every evening. He had a ranch to run, and 40,000 acres don't manage themselves, but most of them. He would arrive around 6, tie his horse at her gate, come up the porch steps, and they would sit with coffee and go over whatever had developed that day. Sometimes there was a great deal to discuss. Sometimes there was nothing new, and they sat in something that had gradually, without either of them formally agreeing to it, become a companionable quiet rather than an awkward one. On the 4th evening, Rosalie said, "You don't have to come every night." "I know," Callum said. On the 5th evening, he came anyway. She noticed. She did not say anything about it. She poured his coffee and sat down across from him and opened her notes. And something in her chest that had been very tightly held for a very long time loosened. Fractionally, in a way she was not ready to examine directly. She kept her attention on the notes. On the 8th day, Aldridge called a meeting. He gathered Rosalie, Callum, and all 5 affected property owners in the Copper Hollow Town Hall, a room that smelled of old wood and accumulated decisions, and he stood at the front with his leather satchel and his efficient manner, and he told them what 11 days of formal review had found. The room was so quiet you could hear the building settle. Horace Danner, Aldridge said, has been operating a coordinated debt manipulation scheme targeting 8 creek-adjacent properties in this valley over a period of approximately 14 months. The scheme involved systematic misrecording of payments, application of fabricated charges, alteration of at least 3 original loan documents, and the creation of a secondary business entity, Colorado Creek Holdings, designed to receive fraudulent transfers of water rights disguised as routine debt settlements. He paused. The total amount extracted from affected property owners through manufactured debt exceeds $1,400. The total value of water rights he intended to acquire through forced default has been preliminarily assessed at somewhere between $12,000 and $18,000. Based on the proposed railroad route and projected water access fees. Someone in the room made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Thomas Pruitt said $12,000. At minimum, Aldridge said. Possibly more. He was going to take my grandfather's ranch, Miguel Garza said. Very quietly, for $12,000. He was going to take all of your properties, Aldridge said. For a fraction of what they were worth. Because he knew something you didn't, that the creek those properties sit on was about to become one of the most strategically valuable water sources in this part of the territory. He looked around the room. He knew because someone with access to the Railroad Investment Consortium gave him advance information about the proposed route. The room shifted. Everyone looked at Callum. "It wasn't me," Callum said. He said it without heat, without defensiveness, simply as a fact being placed on the table. "I'll account for every communication I've had regarding this railroad since November." But Aldridge has already reviewed those records. "I have," Aldridge confirmed. Mr. Rourke is not the source. The individual in question is a Denver businessman named Gerald Barnett, who holds a minority investment stake in the Railroad Consortium and who has had a documented business association with Denver going back 9 years. He paused. Mr. Barnett is currently the subject of a separate investigation by the Territorial Attorney's Office. I am not at liberty to say more about that at this time. Vera Colson, who had not spoken since she sat down, said, "What happens now?" To Danner. "His lending license has been suspended pending the full investigation," Aldridge said. "The acceleration notices issued to each of you are void. Your properties are not at risk." He looked at each of them in turn. "As for prosecution, that is a matter for the territorial court. But I will say this. The documentation Miss Voss compiled is among the most thorough and clearly organized evidence I have received in 20 years of this work. If this matter goes to trial, it will be very difficult for any defense to argue against it. Every head in the room turned toward Rosalie. She sat at the end of the table with her hands around her coffee cup and her ledger closed in front of her, and she accepted their attention without flinching and without performing the way she had learned to accept most things directly, with the understanding that she had done what needed doing and the recognition wasn't the point. "What about our overpayments?" Pruitt said. "The court will determine restitution amounts for each affected party," Aldridge said. "Based on the documentation provided, I expect those determinations to be straightforward." "Straightforward," Calhoun said, and laughed a short, slightly disbelieving sound. "I spent 5 days thinking I was going to lose my property. 30 years on that land." "You're not losing it," Rosalie said. It was the same thing she had said to Miguel Garza 8 days ago in his kitchen. And she meant it the same way she had meant it then, not as comfort, as fact. Calhoun looked at her. "No," he said, "I'm not." He said it like a man who has finally given himself permission to believe something. "Thanks to you. Thanks to your own receipts," Rosalie said. "You kept everyone. My wife made me," he said. "Thank your wife," Rosalie said. Aldridge closed his satchel. "I'll need each of you to remain available for follow-up questions over the next several weeks. And I would ask that you not discuss the details of the investigation publicly until the territorial court has had time to process the initial filing." He looked at Rosalie. "Miss Voss, I'll be in contact about the formal submission. Your documentation will be entered as primary evidence." She nodded once. Aldridge left. In the particular silence of people who have been waiting for something and have just received it and are not yet sure how to move into what comes after. Then Miguel Garza stood up and crossed the room to Rosalie and held out his hand. She shook it. He held on for a moment longer than a standard handshake requires. And she understood that the extra seconds were carrying something that didn't have adequate words in either English or Spanish. "My grandfather built that ranch," he said. "I know," she said. "My son is going to build on it after me," he said. She nodded. He let go and sat back down. Vera Colson reached across the table and put her weathered hand briefly over Rosalie's. She didn't say anything. Rosalie didn't need her to. Pruitt stood, put on his hat, and said to no one in particular, "I'm going home and I'm going to tell my wife she was right to make me keep every receipt." He paused at the door. "She's going to be very pleased about that." He went out. One by one the room emptied until it was just Rosalie and Callum and the old wood smell and the weight of 11 days settling into something that felt, cautiously and without ceremony, like resolution. "It's not over," Rosalie said. "No," Callum agreed. "The court will take time, restitution will take time. Barnett's investigation will take time. But the properties are safe," she said. "The properties are safe," he said. She sat with that for a moment. Felt the specific quality of it, not triumph, not celebration. Something quieter and more durable than those. The satisfaction of a thing done correctly. Of numbers that now balance the way they were supposed to balance. "I need to go home," she said. "I have work to catch up on. I've been behind on the cattle rotation for 2 weeks." "I know," Callum said. "My foreman has also been reminding me that I have 40,000 acres that have been somewhat neglected." She looked at him. "Your foreman is right. My foreman usually is," Callum said. "I find it useful to have people around me who will tell me when I'm wrong." She understood that was not only about his foreman. She let it sit without either dismissing it or reaching for it, which was the honest response. She gathered her ledger and stood. Callum stood too. He picked up his hat. He held the door for her as they went out, not with the performed courtesy of a man making a statement about his manners, but the automatic kind, the kind that comes from actually paying attention to where other people are. And they walked out into the main street of Copper Hollow together. She was wearing the navy dress. She had worn it every time she had come to town during the 11 days. Not because she was making a point, or not only because of that. Because it was hers and it fit her, and she liked it. And those three things were sufficient reason to wear something. People had noticed over those 11 days. Not the noticing of assessment and verdict, but a different kind, the noticing of a person who has become visible in a new way. She had stopped counting it. She had other things to count. They were passing Ashcombe fine dresses when the door opened. Lenora Ashcombe stepped out. She was wearing her burgundy gown. Her hair as precisely arranged as always, her bearing as composed as it had been the first day Rosalie had walked into her shop. But something was different about the composure today. It looked like it was costing something to maintain. She looked at Rosalie. Rosalie stopped. Callum stopped beside her. "Miss Voss," Lenora said. Her voice was controlled. The voice of a woman who has decided to say something and is holding the method of saying it very firmly by the collar. "Mrs. Ashcombe," Rosalie said. A pause. On the main street of Copper Hollow, in the summer heat, with people moving past on both sides, Lenora Ashcombe stood in front of the shop, whose name was painted above the door in her own honor, and looked at Rosalie Voss in the navy dress she had refused to make. "I owe you an apology," said. Rosalie waited. "What I said to you in my shop," Lenora said. It was inexcusable. I knew it when I said it. I said it anyway." She paused. "I told myself I was only reflecting the preferences of my clientele. That I was being practical. That's certain." She stopped. Started again. "I was cruel. I had a paying customer standing in front of me who had done nothing wrong. And I was cruel to her, and I let other people be cruel too." She looked at the navy dress. "I heard what you did. With Danner's accounts. With the other properties." She met Rosalie's eyes. "I heard how long it took you." "A week," Rosalie said. "A week," Lenora said. "I've been thinking about that. About what it says. She straightened slightly. "I am sorry, Miss Voss. Genuinely. For what I said and for the manner in which I said it and for the room I allowed it to happen in." Rosalie looked at her for a long moment. "You owned the room," Rosalie said. Lenora's composure shifted slightly. Not collapsed. Lenora Ashcombe was not a woman whose composure collapsed in public but adjusted. The way something adjusts when a true thing has been said to it. "Yes," Lenora said, "I did." "Then the apology is yours to make," Rosalie said. "You've made it. I heard it." She paused. "I'm not in the business of holding people hostage to their worst moments, Mrs. Ashcombe. But I won't pretend the moment didn't happen." Lenora nodded, a short, precise movement. "That's fair," she said. "It is," Rosalie agreed. She began to walk. Lenora said, "The dress is beautiful." Rosalie didn't stop. But something in her shoulders settled differently. "I know," she said. "I made it." She walked on. Callum fell into step beside her. He didn't comment on what had just happened. She didn't need him to. They walked a full block in silence before he said, quietly, "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Receive an apology without either accepting it completely or throwing it back at her." Rosalie thought about it. "Because she meant it," she said. "But meaning it doesn't erase the thing. Both of those are true at the same time. I don't have to choose between them." Callum was quiet for a moment. "Most people choose one or the other. Most people find the middle ground uncomfortable," Rosalie said. "I've lived in uncomfortable territory my whole life. I've had some practice." The restitution hearings began 3 weeks later. Rosalie had not expected them to happen quickly. Courts did not move quickly. Territory courts moved especially slowly, with the accumulated weight of a legal system still learning how to function in places where the law had arrived after the people. She had prepared herself for months of waiting. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks from Aldridge's formal submission to the territorial court's preliminary ruling, which she later understood was considered extraordinarily fast by any standard of territorial jurisprudence, and which Aldridge, when she asked him about it, attributed entirely to the quality of the documentation. "Cases move at the speed of their evidence," he told her. Yours was unusually clear. The ruling came on a Thursday. Rosalie was at her kitchen table when the messenger arrived with the sealed envelope. She recognized the court seal. She set down the ledger she had been working on routine accounts. Livestock records, the ordinary mathematics of a ranch in summer, and she picked up the envelope and she sat with it for one moment without opening it. She thought about the night she had sat at this same table with a candle and $22.40 in an envelope, and every financial document she owned spread in front of her. Looking at numbers that were wrong in ways she hadn't yet fully understood. She thought about how far away that night felt. She thought about how close it still was. Then she opened the envelope. The court had found in favor of all 6 affected property owners. Danner's manipulation had been formally adjudicated as fraudulent. The acceleration notices were declared void. The Colorado Creek Holdings filings were invalidated. All affected property deeds were confirmed clean and unencumbered. Restitution amounts had been calculated. Rosalie's was listed at $89, the total of her manufactured debt, plus compounded penalties, plus the court's standard addition for documented fraud damages. $89, more than 3 months' wages. More than 4 times what she had spent on a bolt of navy cotton that a woman in a burgundy dress had decided she had no right to own. She folded the ruling carefully and put it in her document cabinet. Then she sat back down at her kitchen table and looked at the ledger she had been working on before the messenger came. At the routine columns and the ordinary numbers, and she felt the specific, quiet satisfaction of an account that has been made correct after a long period of being wrong. Not triumph, not vindication, just correctness. The world brought into alignment with what it was supposed to be. She picked up her pen and went back to work. Danner's sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Rosalie did not attend the preliminary hearing. She had given her formal testimony. Her documentation was in the court record, and she had said everything she needed to say in his office that Tuesday with her navy dress and her receipts and Aldridge coming up the stairs behind her. There was nothing left to say in a courtroom that hadn't already been said on paper. What she did not know, until Callum told her 2 days before the sentencing, was that Gerald Barnett, the Denver investor who had fed Danner the railroad information, had agreed to a full accounting of his communications in exchange for a reduced prosecution. And that accounting had revealed something none of them had fully anticipated. Barnett's cooperation showed that Danner had been running variations of the same scheme in 2 other territories over the previous 6 years. Different names, different creek systems, different railroads, but the same structure. The same manufactured debts, the same Colorado-style secondary business entity. The same careful bet that the people he targeted would be too ashamed, too isolated, or too easily dismissed to compare notes. In one case, he had succeeded. A family in New Mexico Territory had lost their water rights 3 years ago in what had been recorded as a routine debt settlement. They had not known, until Barnett's testimony, that they had lost anything other than a debt they'd believed they genuinely owed. When Callum told her this, Rosalie sat very still for a moment. 3 years, she said. 3 years, Callum said. That family, she said. Do they know now? About what happened to them? Aldridge's office is contacting them, Callum said. It's a different territorial jurisdiction. It's complicated. He paused. But they'll know. Rosalie looked at her hands. He did the same thing to people who never found out, she said. Who still don't know. She looked up. How many people sit alone with numbers that don't add up and assume the mistake is theirs? A lot, Callum said. Too many, she said. She was quiet for a moment. I want to do something, she said. After this is finished. I don't know exactly what the shape of it is yet. But there are women in this valley, in this territory, who can't read a financial document, who wouldn't know how to recognize what Danner did even if it was happening to them, who have no one to help them check the numbers. She looked at Callum. That's a vulnerability he exploited. That's a vulnerability men like him look for specifically. What are you thinking? Callum said. I'm thinking that sewing and bookkeeping are not unrelated skills, Rosalie said. I'm thinking that a woman who can read a pattern can learn to read a contract if someone shows her how. She paused. I'm thinking that I have a ranch house with a large kitchen table, and I know how to explain numbers to people who are frightened of them. Callum looked at her. You want to teach, he said. I want to make it harder for the next Danner to find an easy target, Rosalie said. That's different from teaching. She paused. Although it involves some of the same things. The sentencing came and went. Danner received 7 years imprisonment and full restitution liability across all affected properties in Colorado Territory, with a separate civil determination pending in New Mexico. His lending license was permanently revoked. Colorado Creek Holdings was formally dissolved. All its conditional interest filings vacated. Rosalie learned this from Aldridge's letter, which arrived on a Monday morning with the efficiency of a man who understands that people who have been waiting deserve to stop waiting promptly. She read it. She put it in the cabinet with the court ruling. She went out to check her cattle. 2 days later, she walked to town with a different kind of envelope, this one containing a proposal. She had spent a week writing it, revising it, checking every figure, and it was now as precise as anything she had ever produced. She submitted it to the Copper Hollow Town Council and to a women's civic organization she had recently learned held monthly meetings in the back room of the Presbyterian Church. The proposal was for a community accounting and legal literacy workshop, to be held at her ranch once a month, free of charge, for any woman in the valley who wished to attend. The civic organization sent her a response within 4 days. They would not only attend, they would help. There were 12 women at her kitchen table for the first session, sitting in chairs she had borrowed from 3 neighbors, with copies of a sample financial document she had drafted specifically for teaching purposes, all the elements of real contracts. Manufactured debt structures included, with the predatory clauses circled in red so they would recognize them if they ever saw them again. Vera Colson came. She sat in the front and asked the best questions. One woman came who had never been to anything like this before. She was young, maybe 22, and she sat in the back and didn't say a word for the first hour. And then she raised her hand and said, "Can you show me that part again?" About what a payment receipt is supposed to say. Rosalie showed her. She showed her twice. Then she showed everyone else again too. Because if one person needed it twice, it was worth saying twice. After the session ended, and the borrowed chairs had been returned, and the last woman had ridden or walked home, Rosalie stood in her kitchen looking at the table, at the cleared surface where 12 women had sat with documents and questions, and the beginning of a thing she did not yet have a name for, but recognized as important. She picked up the coffee cups. She washed them one by one. She was drying the last cup when she heard boots on the porch steps. She knew the particular rhythm of those footsteps. She had learned it over the past 6 weeks without deciding to. Callum came through the door she'd left unlocked and looked at the kitchen, the cleared table, the stacked chairs, the papers she hadn't yet filed, and he looked at her. "How did it go?" he said. 12 women, she said. 2 hours. Nobody left her, he said. "That's very good," she said. He sat down at the table. She poured coffee for both of them and sat across from him. And the kitchen was warm, and the evening was coming on, and somewhere outside her cattle were settling for the night. And the ledger on the shelf was balanced, and the deed in her document cabinet said her name. And the navy dress was hanging on the peg by the bedroom door. "Callum," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did. Not the fabric and not the introduction to Aldridge, for staying 3 steps behind me in every room. For never once suggesting that your money made you more qualified to handle this than was." She paused. "That cost you something. People in this town expected you to be in front. Your foreman probably expected it, and you chose not to be." He was quiet for a moment. "It didn't cost me anything," he said. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't minimize it." He looked at her, he said. It required something, a deliberate decision every time. He held her gaze. It wasn't a hard decision, she accepted that. Rosalie, he said, and her first name in his voice had a slightly different weight than she was accustomed to. A different quality of intention. I'd like to keep coming by. Not just while there's business to discuss. After the business is done, he paused. I'd like to keep knowing how you are. She looked at him for a long moment. My ranch stays mine, she said. My accounts stay mine. My workshop, when I build it because I'm going to build one, stays mine. Yes, he said. Without hesitation. And if you ever try to manage something on my behalf without asking me first, she said, I will tell you directly and I'll expect you to hear it. I'd expect nothing less, he said. She looked at her coffee cup. She looked at the cleared table. She thought about 11 days of waiting, and the particular quality of evenings when he had come and they had sat with coffee, and worked through what needed working through together. And the way that had felt not like rescue, not like dependence, but like the specific warmth of a capable person, choosing to be alongside another capable person for no reason other than that was where they wanted to be. All right, she said. All right, he said outside. The summer dark was coming on over the Colorado Territory. Over the dry grasslands and Juniper Creek, catching the last light at the edge of her property. Over the ranches, whose deeds now sat clean and unencumbered in the hands of the people who had earned them. Over a town that was only just beginning to understand what it had been looking at when it had looked at Rosalie Voss and seen nothing worth worrying about. The table was clear, the ledger was balanced, and Rosalie Voss, sitting in her own kitchen on her own land with a man who had learned slowly, correctly, that there was no version of wanting her that could be separated from respecting her. Looked at the evening coming through the window. She was not finished. She had not been finished since the night she sat alone with a candle and refused to believe the mistake was hers. She was, in fact, just beginning. The workshop met every month through the fall. By October, the kitchen table wasn't big enough. Rosalie had started with 12 women. By the third session, she had 19. By the fifth, she had 26. And 2 of them had ridden in from ranches so far out in the valley that they had left before dawn to make it by 9 in the morning. She had borrowed every chair within a quarter mile of her property, and there were still women sitting on the porch step with their documents on their knees, leaning through the open window to hear. She did not turn anyone away. She also did not pretend the situation was manageable when it clearly wasn't. I need a bigger space, she told Callum on a Tuesday evening in late October. Sitting at the kitchen table that had hosted 5 sessions and was beginning to feel the weight of everything it had witnessed. I know a building, he said. I'm not taking your building, she said. It's not my building, he said. It's currently empty. Has been for 8 months. The man who owned it went back east after his wife passed, and he's not coming back. It's sitting on Main Street collecting dust, and he'd rent it for almost nothing to someone who intended to use it. Rosalie looked at him. How do you know what he'd rent it for? Because I wrote him a letter last month, Callum said. And asked. She sat with that for a moment. You wrote a letter on my behalf without asking me. I wrote a letter about available commercial property in Copper Hollow, Callum said. As a matter of general inquiry. Your name wasn't in it, he paused. I may have had a specific application in mind. She looked at him for a long moment. You're walking a very fine line, she said. I know, he said. How am I doing? She almost smiled. Ask me after I've seen the building. She saw it the following morning. It was a good building, solid construction, large front room, smaller back room that could serve as an office, decent light from 2 east-facing windows. It smelled of old wood and dust, and the particular emptiness of a space that had been useful and wanted to be useful again. She stood in the middle of the front room and turned slowly, measuring it the way she measured everything precisely, in her head, against the specific requirements of what she needed. Enough room for 30 women and a table large enough to spread documents across. Enough space to set up a cutting table on one side without crowding the bookkeeping work on the other. Enough light to sew by in the mornings and review accounts by in the afternoons. It was exactly what she needed. She did not say that immediately. "The back room needs work," she said. "It does," Callum agreed. "The front window wants reglazing on the south pane." "Agreed. The rent he's asking is reasonable, but I'd want a 2-year lease minimum before I put any money into improvements." "I think that's negotiable," Callum said. She turned to face him. "I'm going to negotiate it myself." "I know," he said. She wrote to the owner that afternoon. She had a response within 10 days, a 2-year lease at the agreed rate, with an option to purchase at a fixed price if she chose to exercise it before the end of the second year. She read the terms 3 times, found nothing objectionable, and signed it on a Wednesday morning at her kitchen table while her coffee was still hot. Then she sat for a moment with the signed lease in front of her. She thought about the morning 11 months ago, longer now. More than a year, when she had sat at this same table and counted $22.40 into an envelope and told herself she deserved something beautiful. She thought about the $47 discrepancy she had found in her own account that had cracked open everything else. She thought about Vera's tin box and Miguel's grandfather's land, and the young woman who had raised her hand in the back row and asked to see the payment receipt section again. She thought about the navy dress. She put the lease in the document cabinet alongside the court ruling and the deed and the restitution letter. Then she stood up, put on her coat, and went to begin building something. She called it Voss Dressmaking and Alterations. The name was straightforward because Rosalie was a straightforward woman, and she saw no reason to make a plain thing complicated. It was her name, and it described what happened there, and that was sufficient. But what happened there was not only what the name described. The front room held a cutting table, and 2 sewing stations, and a measuring area, and a small display of fabric samples arranged without fuss along one wall. The back room held a desk and 2 chairs, and a shelf of reference documents, contract templates, payment receipt samples, a copy of the territorial land statutes that Aldridge had helped her obtain, and a growing collection of the teaching materials she had developed over 5 months of monthly workshops. Every woman who came through the door for a fitting was invited to come back on the 2nd Thursday of the month. Not required, invited. What happened on those Thursdays was part sewing circle, part accounting class, part something that didn't have an official name in 1878 Colorado territory, but would have been recognized in any era as women teaching each other how to be less vulnerable to men who depended on their ignorance. Vera Colson became Rosalie's first regular assistant. She had a natural gift for explaining things to nervous people, the patience of a woman who had learned through her own fear what it felt like to not understand something important and need someone to explain it without judgment. The young woman from the back row, her name was Clara. She was 22. She was the wife of a young rancher who had a small property on the Northern Creek line and a Danner account that turned out to have been manipulated for 4 months before the scheme collapsed, came to every session. Within 3 months, she could read a contract faster than most men who had twice her years and twice her schooling. "You have a head for this," Rosalie told her one Thursday afternoon when everyone else had gone and Clara was still at the desk, working through a sample deed document Rosalie had drafted for teaching. "I never thought I did," Clara said without looking up. "Nobody ever gave me anything like this to try. That's the problem," Rosalie said. "Not the head." Clara looked up. "Is that what you're doing? Giving people the opportunity?" Rosalie thought about it. "I'm giving people the tools," she said. "What they do with them is their own." Clara looked back at the document. "My mother couldn't read," she said. "She managed a household of 7 and kept a garden and raised 6 children, and she couldn't read a single contract she signed." She paused. "She signed things because my father told her to, and she trusted him, and he was a good man. So it worked out. But what if he hadn't been?" "Question," Rosalie said. "Is exactly why we're here." Shop was 3 months old when Ashcombe Fine Dresses closed. It happened quietly, the way things close when there is no drama attached to the ending, just a gradual dwindling of customers. A closed sign appearing more often than the open one. And then one morning a final sale notice in the window. And a week after that, nothing in the window at all. Rosalie heard about it from Vera, who had heard about it from the woman who ran the dry goods store 2 doors down. She received the news the way she received most news she had been half expecting without visible reaction. With a private internal acknowledgement of the fact. And then a deliberate return to what she had been doing. She did not celebrate. She did not feel sorry. She felt, if she was being precise about it, something that was neither of those things, a kind of quiet completion. The sense of a circle that had closed, not because she had forced it, but because things tend to close of their own accord when the ground under them has changed. What she did not expect was Lenora Ashcombe coming through her door 2 days later. Lenora looked different without the context of her shop. Less certain. Not diminished. Lenora Ashcombe would not be diminished by circumstance. She was not built that way, but stripped of the particular armor that comes from being on your own ground. She stood in the front room of Voss Dressmaking and Alterations, and looked at the cutting table, and the fabric sample, and the measuring area. And then she looked at Rosalie. "I came to ask," Lenora said carefully, "whether you have any work available." The room held very still. Rosalie looked at her. "Sewing," Lenora said. "Alterations." She paused. "I was a dressmaker for 22 years before the shop." "I know the work, I know you do," Rosalie said. "I am not asking for charity," Lenora said. And something in the way she said it, the directness of it, the lack of cushioning, made Rosalie recognize it as the same thing she herself had said in a different room, to a different person, what felt like a different lifetime ago. She looked at Lenora for a long moment. "I have terms," Rosalie said. "I expected you would," Lenora said. "Every woman who comes through that door gets treated the same way," Rosalie said. "Measured without commentary. Fitted without judgment. I don't care what she weighs, or what she looks like, or whether she matches your previous clientele. She walks in, she gets the same respect you'd give any paying customer." "Can you do that?" Lenora held her gaze. "Yes," she said. "If I hear otherwise," Rosalie said, "once, just once, that's the end of it." "Understood," Lenora said. Rosalie looked at the cutting table, at the work stacked beside it. The alterations orders that had been accumulating faster than she and Vera could handle them alone. "Monday morning, she 7 o'clock. Lenora nodded once. She turned to go. "Lenora," Rosalie said. She stopped. "I don't need you to understand me," Rosa said. "I don't need you to approve of me. I need you to do good work and treat people right. If you can do those 2 things, everything else takes care of itself." Lenora stood with her hand on the doorframe. "You're a more practical woman than I gave you credit for," she said. "You gave me no credit at all," Rosalie said. "But we can start from here." Lenora left. Rosalie stood in the middle of her front room and breathed in and breathed out, and then she went back to the cutting table and the work that was waiting. The railroad arrived in Copper Hollow in the spring. Not the full line that was still years away, but the survey crew and the advance engineering team and the formal announcement of the route, which came with a notice in the Copper Hollow Gazette and a town meeting at which Callum, as one of the principal investors, was asked to speak. He kept it short. He said the railroad was coming. It would bring economic change, and every property owner along the planned route should ensure their deeds and water rights were properly registered before the formal acquisition process began. Then he sat down. Rosalie was in the back of the room with Vera and Clara and Miguel Garza and Thomas Pruitt and Calhoun and half a dozen other people who had spent the better part of the last year making absolutely certain their documents were in order. She watched him sit down and caught his eye across the room and gave him the small, precise nod that meant she had registered what he'd just done, the way he had used his moment at the front of that room not to perform authority, but to protect people who needed the information. He gave her the same nod back. After the meeting, The water rights negotiation with the railroad took 6 weeks. Rosalie handled her own entirely. With a land agent, she had engaged through Aldridge's recommendation a woman named Patterson, who practiced out of Denver and charged fair rates, and had the kind of straightforward competence that Rosalie recognized and trusted immediately. The agreement she signed gave the railroad company limited seasonal access to the Eastern Collection Pool on Juniper Creek in exchange for annual payment and a series of conditions she had negotiated personally, including a clause requiring the railroad to maintain the creek banks in their current condition and a provision ensuring her existing cattle access was not interrupted. Patterson, reviewing the final terms before signature, looked at the conditions Rosalie had inserted and said, "You've done this before." "I read carefully," Rosalie said. "And I don't sign anything without understanding every word." "Half the property owners along this route didn't read their agreements at all," Patterson said. She wasn't complaining. She was observing, with the particular dryness of a woman who has witnessed a great deal of human behavior in the context of legal documents. "I know," Rosalie said. "That's something I'm working on." The annual payment from the railroad was enough to make her third year on the property genuinely comfortable for the first time. Not wealthy, she had no particular interest in wealthy but solid. The kind of financial ground that holds when things get hard rather than crumbling under you, which she had learned the difference between in a very immediate and personal way. She put some of it back into the shop, a third sewing station, better lamps for the back room, a proper sign above the door, painted by the man on Garrett Street who did the best letterwork in the valley. The sign said, "We fit the dress to the woman, never the woman to the dress." It was simple. It said what she meant. People stopped to read it. Some of them came in. Some of them stood in front of it for a moment and then kept walking. And she understood that too, some things take time to feel safe enough to walk toward. It was on a Thursday in late May, just over a year after the sentencing, that Rosalie found the brown dress. She was cleaning out the old trunk at the back of her ranch house bedroom, the one she had been meaning to properly sort for 2 years and kept finding reasons to defer when her hands found familiar fabric folded at the very bottom. She recognized it before she pulled it out, the weight of it. The particular texture of cotton that had been washed and dried and worn and washed again, so many times it had achieved a kind of softness that only comes from years of use. She pulled it out and sat on the edge of the bed and held it. The faded brown dress with its history of letting out. The seams that barely remembered where they'd started. The evidence of 11 months of wearing something that fit as an apology rather than a choice. She sat with it for a long time. She thought about the morning she had walked into Ashcombe Fine Dresses in this dress and put her money on the counter. She thought about straightening the shoulders and walking out. She thought about sitting on the bench by the watering trough, pressing the heels of her hands against her eyes and not crying. Not quite, but coming very close. She did not feel sad. Holding it now, she felt something more complicated than sad. A kind of layered recognition of how far she had come. Yes, but also of what it had cost to get there, and of the women who had not yet made it this far. And of the ones who had, and of everything the worn brown cotton had held in its fibers, whether it wanted to or not. She stood up. She carried the dress to the shop on her next open day. She cut a piece from the hem, a small piece, 4 inches square, and she framed it in a simple wooden frame she made herself. And she hung it on the wall of the back room beside her desk. Then she cut a matching square from the remaining scraps of navy cotton she had kept folded on the shelf since the day she'd made the dress. And she hung that beside it, 2 pieces of fabric on a wall. Nobody asked about them for 2 weeks. Then Clechard came into the back room one afternoon to return a reference document and stopped in front of the frames and stood looking at them. "What are those?" she said. "Reminders," Rosalie said. Without looking up from her accounts of what, Rosalie set down her pen. She looked at the 2 squares of fabric. She thought about how to say it in a way that was true, and not too large and not too small. "The brown one," she said, is from the dress I was wearing the day someone told me I didn't deserve a beautiful thing. Clara looked at it. The blue one, Rosalie said, is from the dress I made myself to prove them wrong. Clara was quiet for a moment. Which one matters more? Rosalie thought about it. They both matter, she said. You can't have the second one without the first one. And the first one only means something because there was a second one. Clara nodded slowly. She stood in front of the frames for another moment. Then she said, I'm going to make myself a dress. Rosalie looked at her. A real one, Clara, that fits. One I chose because I like it. She paused. Can you teach me? Come Saturday morning, Rosalie said. We'll start with measurements. It was on a warm evening in early June that Callum came to the shop after closing time. She heard his boots on the boardwalk. Before she heard the knock, she had learned the rhythm of those footsteps over a year and a half and recognized them the way you recognize something that has become part of the ordinary fabric of your days, without your having formally decided to let it in. She unlocked the door. He was wearing a navy neckerchief. She recognized the fabric immediately, the deep blue with the tiny cream flowers. Cut from the remaining scraps of the original bolt, her bolt. The one she had accepted on account on a dusty road, with her shoulders straight and her dignity intact, and $22.40 in her pocket. He had asked her, 3 weeks ago, if he could have a small piece of the remaining fabric. She had given it to him without asking why. She had assumed he'd have it made into something for his ranch work. She had not anticipated this. You made a neckerchief, she said. Vera made it, he said. I asked her not to tell you. Vera kept a secret, Rosalie said. I'll need to recalibrate my assumptions about Vera. He almost smiled. He stood in the doorway of her shop with the navy neckerchief at his collar and his hat in his hand, and the particular expression she had come to know as Callum Rourke, about to say something he has thought about more carefully than he will let on. Rosalie, he said. I've been thinking, he said, about what it would look like to build something together. He paused. Not to combine things, not to merge or absorb, or I've watched you very carefully for a year and a half, and I understand very clearly that those are not options you would consider, and they are not options I am proposing. He met her eyes. Your ranch stays yours, your shop stays yours, your Thursdays, your workshops, your Patterson agreements, your ledgers, all of it stays exactly as it is. Under your name, under your authority. She waited. What I'm asking, he said, is whether there's room inside all of that for me, not in front of any of it. Alongside it, he paused. Alongside you, the shop was quiet around them. The cutting table and the sewing stations, and the fabric samples on the wall, and the 2 framed squares in the back room, and the sign above the door that said what she meant. She looked at him. She thought about a year and a half of evenings with coffee and ledgers. About a man who had stayed 3 steps behind her in every room they'd walked into together, and had not as performance and not as strategy, but as the natural consequence of understanding that the person walking in front of him was where the important work was happening. About the telegram he had sent to Aldridge. About the survey maps he had brought on a Tuesday evening without being asked. About the way he had said yes to every condition she had set. Not reluctantly, not with the patience of a man waiting for her to stop, but with the ease of someone who found her terms entirely reasonable because he had never expected anything different. She thought about what he had said to her once, sitting at this same table. Though it had been her kitchen table then, not his money. Her records, her proof, her case. She thought about what it meant that a man with 40,000 acres and 5,000 head of cattle had understood that truth clearly enough to say it out loud. One condition, she said. Name it, he said. If you ever walk in front of me, she said, in any room, about any matter that belongs to me, you hear about it immediately. And you step back, he said, without hesitation. If I am ever spoken over in a room because someone has decided you are the more relevant person to address, she said, you redirect them to me. Agreed, she said. If there are ever children, he was very still. They grow up knowing their mother runs her own affairs. she said. They grow up watching it. They grow up thinking it is the most ordinary thing in the world. Callum looked at her for a long moment. Rosalie, he said, I have wanted nothing less than the full version of you, since the morning I watched you straighten your shoulders and walk out of a shop that didn't deserve to have you in it. He paused. Everything you are is everything I am asking for. I am not asking you to be smaller, so there is more room for me. She looked at the navy neckerchief at his collar. She looked at his face. Then yes, she said. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no crowd, no ceremony, no one watching but the empty shop, and the evening coming through the windows, and whatever Colorado summer chose to do with its time. He crossed the room and she did not step back, and he took her hand and held it. And they stood together in the middle of Voss dressmaking and alterations, while the sign above the door said what she meant, and the 2 squares of fabric waited in their frames, in the back room, and the creek ran along the eastern edge of her property the way it had always run. Clear and reliable and entirely hers. A month later, on a Saturday morning, a woman came into the shop. She was younger than Clara, maybe 19, and she was large-bodied. And she moved through the door, the way people move, when they have been told so many times that they are taking up too space that they have started moving, as though they are trying to take up less of it. She stood in the front room and looked at the fabric samples on the wall, and the cutting table, and the measuring area. And she did not immediately speak. Rosalie came out from the back room. She looked at the young woman. She recognized what she was seeing, not the body, not the dress, not anything visible from the outside. She recognized the particular internal posture of someone who has been told for years that what they want is not available to them. Who has come anyway, because wanting is stubborn and does not always listen to discouragement. But who is prepared to be told no in the familiar way and has already begun building the composure to survive it. Good morning, Rosalie said. The young woman looked at her. Good morning, ma'am. I was told someone told me you make dresses for all sizes. I make dresses that fit the woman wearing them, Rosalie said. Whatever size that is. The young woman's hands moved slightly at her sides. I've been to 2 other shops, she said carefully. They couldn't. They said they didn't have patterns that would. Those shops measure their patterns and fit women to them, Rosalie said. That's not how we work here. She gestured toward the measuring area. We start with you. The dress comes after. The young woman looked at the measuring area. She looked at Rosalie. Something in her face moved, not relief. Not quite, but the beginning of relief. The moment just before a person allows themselves to feel something they have been braced against. Can you really make something that will look good on me, she said. Rosalie looked at her directly. She thought about a morning more than a year ago when she had stood in a different shop in a faded brown dress and been told that her body was the problem. She thought about the navy cotton and the pattern she had drafted on newspaper on her kitchen floor and the dress she had made that fit, not despite her body but because of it. Precisely, with knowledge and care and the absolute conviction that fitting a woman correctly was not a compromise but a skill. She thought about what it had cost her to walk back into this town in that dress, and what it had felt like to walk back out again. She thought about 2 squares of fabric on a wall. I don't make women worthy of beautiful clothes, Rosalie said. I make clothes worthy of the women wearing them. The young woman stood very still for a moment. Then she stepped forward, and Rosalie Voss, who had slapped her honest money on a counter in a brown dress and been told she did not belong, who had sat alone with a candle and a ledger and refused to believe the mistake was hers, who had walked back through this town in a dress she had cut and sewn and fitted herself, who had documented a fraud and dismantled a scheme and held 12 women and then 26 women around her kitchen table and taught them to read the fine print. Rosalie Voss reached for her measuring tape. Because a woman's body had never been the problem. The only thing that had ever been the problem was the cruelty of people who believed that dignity came in one size, and the silence of everyone who had watched them say so and called it reasonable. And the wealthy cowboy who had bought a bolt of navy cotton on a dusty Tuesday morning had not given Rosalie Voss her worth. He had simply been wise enough to recognize it before almost anyone else in Copper Hollow did. And that, in the end, was all she had ever needed from him. Not rescue, not permission, just someone standing beside her, steady and certain, while she built something the whole town would one day walk past and be better for having seen.